Wheel of Genre, the show for readers whose most reliable friends are just waiting to stab them in the back. Each week we spin the wheel and land on a new genre. Spies, mysteries, horror, romance, SF, it's all on the shelf. And right now we are reading mystery novels.
First, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, then The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett, Farewell My Lovely by Raymond Chandler, Vengeance is Mine by Mickey Spillane, and finally, A Murder of Quality by John le Carré.
And we're starting it off with Agatha Christie's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in the narrative twist of the narrator being the killer. It feels groundbreaking, but it feels also like it could possibly only be done one time convincingly in the history of literature. This is really something I want to talk to you about.
I'm Bob, and I'm interested in spoilers. My goodness, Zach, right out of the gate. Spoiled. I'm interested in what happens if you've read it twice, or what happens if it is spoiled for you. Does that make a difference? Could it actually make it better?
I guess my first question for you, like you said, we've read other Poirot stories, though I wouldn't say that we're too deep into Poirot. What was your impression of him this time? How does he feel as our detective leading us through this case?
I think he's a fun detective. I know that Christie got tired of him eventually, the egg-headed little man with the ridiculous mustache. But he's fun. He talks about logic, the little gray cells, and using his own brain and powers of observation. I think in the Mysterious Affair at Styles, he has more of that OCD feeling where he's really trying to rearrange things and he seems kind of obsessive. He's more relaxed in this, but that could be intentional too. This is the third Poirot book. We skipped Murder on the Links. I'm sorry. We'll go back and read that eventually. But this is the third one. Comes out, I think, 1926. And maybe it's because he's retired. You know, Hastings has moved away and he's maybe more relaxed because of that. But I found him, I don't know, I think it's quite fun being along with Poirot. Do you think he's as fun as Sherlock? Do you think he's not quite there? How does he feel to you as a detective?
I'll say this. I do feel like he feels a little less well-defined for me as a detective. And one of the characteristic things about detective fiction for me is always I'm trying to get a good sense of who this detective is, because if I can understand who they are, I can understand their methods. Like, there's always this sense in which I feel like I'm the understudy of the detective. And it's interesting to me how a lot of who Poirot is, to me, feels more like personality quirks rather than Sherlock Holmes like laying out an entire methodology for the reader. But I do think that he does function in a really interesting position in comparison to all of the characters in this small rural England town. All of them know each other. All of them have a history. They all have a pre-existing relationship. He's from the outside, but he's not just like from another village or anything like that. He's from another country, another culture. So he's always the foreigner there. And because of that, not only do the habits of the people in this town seem strange to him, but he seems strange to them. I like that dynamic of him being like truly an outsider coming in.
This is a very good point, Zach. I hadn't thought of that until you started mentioning it, but he is so different in this book from the first book, and then he and Sherlock Holmes are extremely different too. He's the outsider, and I think in this book he's playing it up even more so, because so much of the tension is we know that there's something strange going on, and that Poirot keeps getting... You know, Hastings in the first book, in Mysterious Affair at Styles, Hastings will say something stupid. And then Poirot kind of explains to him, no, that's not quite on the right track. And he's pretty nice to Hastings. He keeps certain things away from Hastings because he knows that Hastings will go and blab, you know, and then the investigation will be bunk. But here, I think it's interesting because we see Shepard doubting Poirot constantly, and it's all through his eyes, and he doesn't care at all about Poirot. Hastings often will think, wow, okay, that was pretty interesting, you know, like Watson does for Sherlock. However, Dr. Shepard thinks Poirot is just a huge bore. He's never heard of him before. His Carolyn tells him who he is. You know, he's this famous detective. He's the world's most famous detective. Never heard of him. Every time he does something, Dr. Shepard says, oh, that's pretty mundane. That's pretty silly. That's not very good detective work. Whereas we have Watson being the cheerleader for Sherlock Holmes constantly. So we see the extraordinariness of Sherlock Holmes not only through Conan Doyle, but we also see him through Watson's eyes, and Watson thinks he's the coolest thing since sliced bread. But here, I think deliberately we want to, or at least Shepard is trying to paint Poirot as extremely boring to us. So he's leaving out certain things that are cool, and Poirot is being he's concealing a lot too. So he's not going to admit to how genius he is. Occasionally he'll say, oh, I did that because I have an idea. I did that because I wanted her to say one thing, but he doesn't explain anything to him. Well, some things, but mostly doesn't explain anything to him.
So I think the thrust of what you're identifying is correct, but I wonder if the fact that the narrator himself is the person who's trying to escape detection plays a large part in the way that he writes Poirot. It's not just that the narrator is the killer, but it's what we're reading is an actual manuscript that he has been writing throughout the procession of the case. And he gives Poirot the manuscript at one point for Poirot to look it over and, what do you think of it? But I think that what's really interesting about that is the text that we're reading, it's not just him communicating to us. It's him actively trying to deceive Poirot. It's part of the deception. It's part of the attempt to escape. And in that sense, there's overt details that are, withdrawn or held out, or, he gets really clever with how he describes things like, oh, I finished up my business in there. And by that, he meant he killed him.
So good.
Yeah. But the way that he describes Poirot can be also read as a kind of repressed hostility. He hates Poirot because Poirot could be the one who identifies him, but he can't write that because it's a message going to the detective. So he has to he has to tamp it down as much as possible. But no matter how much he tamps it down, you can still read the words and be like, oh, this guy does not like the detective, but we can't figure out why.
Yes, he presents Poirot. Here, I got a question for you. So the style is quite interesting because it is a note. Poirot basically tells him, look, you can either, I'm going to turn you into the police tomorrow, or you can go take poison. Whoa. So he takes poison and he signs off, this is my confession. I think it's interesting because it doesn't matter anymore what he confesses to the detective because it's all written down, all the truth. We know as much as the detective is going to know. So it doesn't make a difference that he conceals anything. But it's quite interesting that he's writing, it's Agatha Christie writing this, and she's writing a mystery, but there's also something the narrator himself is kind of playing into the deliciousness of this. He doesn't want to spoil the mystery for the reader. He's going to withhold it so that we keep trying to figure out who's done it until the very end. And that's why he has that little note of, yes, after I was in the study, after I completed what I needed to do, he goes on from there. It's interesting to me that it's necessary for telling the story, and you could say, oh, that's kind of corny. I mean, why doesn't he just tell us if it's a confession? He should tell us right away. But I think it feels right. There's something delicious and something exciting about even the murderer having fun about telling this mystery, even though the jig is up, he's still kind of excited about it.
At the start of the episode, you had said that you were really interested in whether this is a different story. If you read it back again, if it's more interesting, if it's more fruitful or revelatory on a second read through, do you feel that way? I mean, you posed it as a question, but I want to know what you think.
So this is the second time I've read it. Read it a long time ago and had no idea. I just kind of picked up an Agatha Christie book and then I could never see the end of a mystery at all, so I was completely shocked. But I think it was more fun almost this time because I know it's him the entire time, and then I can really spot that resentment or that kind of repressed hate that you mentioned earlier, because it is all a matter of not just I don't like Poirot, but also, oh, I'm sure he's wrong. I'm sure he doesn't know what he's talking about. I've got my tracks covered. It's all okay. And seeing him also, when they it's weird because he becomes his confidant too. It's not just that he's the narrator. It's also he's the Watson. So whenever Poirot is kind of doing the pre-denouement where he says, this is where I am up so far up to the case. What do you think about this? Dr. Shepard will give feedback on what Poirot is saying and, give him sometimes feedback that is reasonable and Poirot is looking for, but sometimes he'll also give feedback that I think is concealing, covering his ass. So I think that's an exciting thing too, is to have not just the narrator being the killer, but also the confidant being the killer. We don't know, I guess, who the outsmarter has been outsmarted, I guess I want to say, because Dr. Shepard is pretty sure as the confidant, I've got everything covered. Poirot's on the wrong trail. I know he's interviewing this person because he suspects them. He doesn't know it's me. But then Poirot knows the whole time that it's Dr. Shepard. So you see that kind of that power playing out. And I think that's why it's so exciting. After it's been spoiled, you can see the power dynamic and why it's happening the whole time. And it's more exciting to piece it together.
I think I want to push back a little bit, because I think on the first read through, or like, I guess I would say on a unknowing read through, Shepard sets himself up. He portrays himself in the text as the confidant. However, just like in the same way that his repressed hatred for Poirot reveals itself in his writing, knowing that Poirot knows that Shepard did it from the very beginning, you can actually see Poirot testing him multiple times throughout the story. Like asking him, by the way, do you remember if the boots were brown or black? And then later it comes out, Poirot's like, I don't care if the boots are brown or black. I just wanted to know if he was wearing boots. And he says that was just a test I was giving other people. But, astute readers will remember that he's given all these same tests to Shepard. But it's kind of like it's the blindness of the narrator that he thinks he's so outsmarted the detective that it doesn't even cross his mind that he's under suspicion. And, Poirot plays into this a little bit. When the denouement happens, he gathers everyone in the room, and he lists off the names of everyone in attendance and says, you are all potential suspects. However, what I noticed was he didn't say the name Shepard in that list. But Shepard was there, but he was not listed as one of the potential suspects. All part of the ruse, I believe. I believe that, I hate to psychologize too much about Poirot, but I get the sense that if Poirot was not absolutely certain of who the killer was, he would not have called everyone together. And it is a strategic choice of him to continue at that point to let the killer believe that they've gotten away with the crime and that someone else is going to get the pen for it.
What a great construction throughout, too. This idea, the trope from Sherlock Holmes is this sidekick is a doctor. So you trust the sidekick, that he is not going to be the killer. The other part is there's a good reason for a doctor to be there. Yes, he's his friend, but a doctor always shows up at the scene of the crime. A doctor has to be there to check if the body's killed. So of course you just assume, it makes sense that he's there. There's no other reason that this Dr. Shepard character would be there. He just has to be. He's friendly. He's a doctor.
Well, the doctor's really the best profession to be the killer, right? All the talk of poisons, all the talk of drugs, cocaine, the doctor has all of the tools necessary in order to do the murder. And I think that it's just funny that it's actually like a side swipe in that it wasn't the poisons or the drugs or, whatever. It's the knife. It's always the knife. What did you think of Caroline? Carolyn Shepard.
I think she's great. What does he call her? The mongoose? She's a great gossip. I think that she is the inspiration later for Miss Marple. And I think she's great. She's kind of, she's in everybody's business, but she's a lot of fun. And she's keeping track. So that's interesting too, that it's Dr. Shepard's sister, who is also a investigator, like an amateur sleuth in this. And we have so many sleuths happening. She's not quite putting it in the right direction, maybe because she doesn't want to suspect her brother, but she's collecting lots of things. And Poirot is even sometimes impressed with her. It makes it extra exciting, and it really makes Dr. Shepard seem even more smart because he outsmarts his sister, who's always the amateur sleuth. He outsmarts the real investigator, and he outsmarts everyone else around us, and potentially readers, at least me. The only one that he doesn't outsmart, even though he's sure, is Poirot, who always says, Poirot knows everything. Poirot always knows. What did you think about Poirot piecing all of these things together? Is it a earlier you said maybe Poirot's not as exciting here. We don't get much about his psychology, but how he solves the case. Did that strike you as interesting? Even though it's just, I know it, I know the answer, I'm going to tell you at the end. Was it interesting to get there?
I'll be honest with you, when it comes to like, specifically like Golden Age mysteries, I actually, I see the fish hook, I see the worm on the hook, and I can't bite, if that makes sense. Like I know the books are begging you to please, here's all the evidence, try to solve it with us. Become Carolyn Shepherd, look at the maps, look at the evidence, look for places where people's testimony doesn't match up. I have no interest in playing along. I love being along for the ride, but something about it just doesn't appeal to my sensibilities as a reader. So when you ask whether I was, I guess you could say, like, dazzled with the solution presented by Poirot, I think dazzled is probably the wrong word for me, because it's not like I had my own notes running side by side and I was like, oh, Poirot, of course, that's what it was. For me, it's a little bit more like, okay, here's the inevitable wrap up where everything is revealed. I don't want to say my brain is off. I'm just saying my brain is looking at other things in the text on the way up to the denouement.
I really liked that it's so mundane. Yes, you should be, we should be getting involved, I guess, making notes. Smarter readers, I am not smart enough to read a mystery, to be honest. I have never, ever solved a mystery once, except for the top secrets by highlights for kids. Man, those were good, but you just had to solve the puzzle. And there were instructions. But here, I think it's fun that the reveal is very, very mundane. It comes down to everyone's got a motive, and lots of I think Carolyn keeps talking about psychology. People are saying, oh, what do you think is the psychological motive of these people? Everyone has a different opinion about how to solve a mystery. However, when it really comes down to it, Poirot tells Dr. Shepherd, look, you were there right after the scene. You were the only one with a bag that could have concealed the dictaphone. You were the only one who came back. So he's the only one who was at the right place at the right time, had no other alibi, and had the only receptacle to take this thing away, and then kept showing up to every subsequent issue. So he explains, look, I've ruled everyone else out. All of the other things have been kind of a ruse, and I've been waiting for you to step over too far and kind of confess it. It's just paying close attention to a schedule and then saying, look, you're the last available person. It must be you. I've ruled everyone else out. Earlier, you sent me this W.H. Auden article about what he thinks about mystery, and I really liked his introduction where he's talking about, I can only, these are the reasons I like mystery, but it's dangerous for me. It's like an addiction. It's like coffee, or it's like cigarettes. I start and then I can't stop, and I have to get to the end. I can never read it again, which I thought was interesting. He says, I will never read another mystery again. If I pick it up and I get 10 pages in and realize I've read it before, I will stop. I will not pursue that a second time. What do you think about this? Mysteries as addictive, and then mysteries as you can only read them once. You kind of have to toss them out after that, or hand them on after that.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the kind of engagement that I was saying I personally can't get in, the kind of hoodwinking of the reader, or the transfixiation of the reader into the world or the puzzle of the mystery. And maybe it's mystery novel as puzzle, mystery novel as activity, that I think Auden right there is specifically saying he loves so much. But it's like any other kind of like brain game. You could do it twice, but why would you? Once you realize that you've already solved this puzzle, or rather seen the solution of it, you don't get the same reward for solving it a second time, because you've seen how it plays out. I think that what Auden is describing is something that is a lot more kind of fundamental, like it's a fundamental mental activity that just so happens to be in the form of the book. And we're going to be reading hard-boiled fiction novels later, and I think it's really interesting to see how Auden views these hard-boiled fiction novels. He talks about Raymond Chandler a lot, who famously wrote an essay trash-talking the golden age of detection fiction, basically this book that we're reading. What Raymond Chandler said was that he didn't like these books because essentially they make the police look like idiots so that a brazen amateur can present some kind of fake solution. What Auden had to say back to Chandler was, you're reading it all wrong. He says, yeah, Chandler's great, but Chandler doesn't care about the detective fiction novel as detective fiction. He cares about the criminal mindset. He cares about what could possibly make a human murder another human being. He's like an American Dostoevsky. That's the wrong mindset to approach these kinds of books. You have to approach it with the mindset of someone who's really into Sudoku, you know?
I think, isn't that article, the Raymond Chandler article called The Art of Murder, I think?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes sense. That article is all about truth. He wants reality. So Auden's criticism is fair, but these English kind of puzzle box mysteries, these golden age mysteries, are to invite the reader to participate and try and solve something alongside, as if the detective were a stand-in. And I guess Raymond Chandler's reaction is, no, that's not real at all. I'm going to show you one where the bad guys get away, the detective loses his money, and nothing really good comes out of it. You go into the mean streets of LA, and the mean streets spit you back out. I think the writing, though, in this is very good, and I think Christie has stayed so famous for so long. Yes, she wrote so many books, but also her books are really, really fun. The writing is great. That mahjong scene is just incredible. They're all playing mahjong, and they're criticizing each other for their plays in mahjong, saying that was a very inelegant hand. I can't believe you just did that. And then also arguing about the cases. They even get into this idea of they start arguing about what to call the pieces, and it just happens so quickly, and it's very delightful. So I think that maybe these are not as realistic, but maybe they are their own genre, and it is a participation in genre, not necessarily in reality. Apart from that, the writing is exceptional.
Well, I mean, I hate to really spin this out too far, but, hard-boiled detection fiction novels are not real life. You know what I mean? Raymond Chandler novels are just as much of an exercise in genre. All hard-boiled fiction is just as much of its own weird little world that obeys its own laws and moves inexorably towards its determined end as much as Agatha Christie novels. It's just that I think because the Christie novels invite the reader to play along just a little bit more, we can kind of see the outlines of the construct in the Christie novels.
I think you're right. It is about the genre, and I'm excited to read the heavy-hitting, dark stuff of Hardboiled, even though maybe it is also just its own genre. However, we're starting with Dashiell Hammett, and Dashiell Hammett was a detective. So I'm excited to see. We've read Raymond Chandler, who is Dashiell Hammett's big fan. But let's see what Dashiell Hammett does when he's got the real experience, and he might be referring to things he's seen on the beat.
Which Hammett text are we starting with next week, Bob?
Oh, the Maltese Falcon, Zach.
Oh, wow. Classic. All right.
Bogey classic.
Talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.